Good morning. Happy Wednesday. This is Pastor Mark and wanted to bring you just a little bit of encouragement on this Wednesday, the middle of the week day. And hopefully this encourages you to continue following God every step of the way in your faith journey this week. So at Fultondale First Baptist, we have a Bible reading plan, and we've been going through the New Testament chapter by chapter this year. And last week we were in 2 Corinthians. In fact, we finished up 2 Corinthians this week and went to Galatians. But there's a specific passage that you may have heard, probably, and it's kind of a famous one, but I wanted to read it to you and share just a few thoughts to encourage you today, because here's the thing. All of us, we're in August, and if you're a parent, school started back, sports teams and activities. It's crazy. Your life is probably busy like mine. And even if you're not a parent, this time of year, it can be so stressful and so busy, so many activities, so many things going on. And it can get difficult. It can get frustrating. And sometimes you think, what am I even doing? And if you're like me, you experience failure a good bit, and you begin to question yourself, and you question your purpose, and what is God doing? Why am I even in this place? And why is God really called me to this? And you begin to question everything. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of encouragement from 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul experienced discouragement too. In fact, he talks about how God left him with a thorn in the flesh, actually gave him a thorn in the flesh. We don't know what that is. We don't know if it was a physical issue, if it was a temptation. We don't know what it was, but something God allowed or even gave Paul so that it would keep him humble and reliant on God. And here's what he said. He asked God 3 times to remove that thorn in the flesh. He didn't remove it, but here's what God's response to Paul was. He said, "But he said to me," this is verse 9 of 2 Corinthians 12, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore," Paul says, "I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And what he's saying is, when I'm weak, God is strong in me. And so sometimes we come to a place in life and we think, this is too much. And you may have heard that saying, God will never give you more than you can handle. That's actually not in the Bible. It does say that God's not going to tempt you beyond what you can bear. But oftentimes, I believe God gives us intentionally more than we can handle. Just like Paul's saying, so that in our weakness, God is made strong in us and through us. And so what God said to Paul, God says the same thing to you. His grace is sufficient for you. When you don't think you can make it another step, when you don't know what to do, when you don't know where to turn, when you're so discouraged, when you have experienced failure after failure after failure, God's grace is sufficient for you. It will carry you through. And here's what's amazing. I learned this, when I experienced and ministered to people who've lost loved ones, I realized early on in my ministry that God gives us exactly the amount of grace that we need for the time. And God's grace increases when our need increases. I've seen people who have lost someone near and dear to them, and I didn't think they would be able to make it through it, but they did, with peace even on the other side, because of God's grace. God's grace is sufficient for you. No matter what you're facing, no matter how difficult it is, God's grace is sufficient for you. Now, what do? We tend to rely on our own strength, don't we? We think, well, I'm going through this, I've got this, God doesn't seem to be coming through, I've got to make my own way, I've got to figure this out on my own. That's when we get tired, beat down, frustrated, and honestly, ready to give up. That's what happens because we're relying on our own strength. God doesn't say, I'm going to increase your strength. He says, my grace is sufficient when you have no strength left. When you come to the end of yourself, that is when my grace is really made known in your life. And so let me just encourage you. It may be a tough week. It may be a tough month. It may be a tough day, a tough season, a tough year. But God's grace is sufficient for you, because His power is made perfect in your weakness. So, like Paul, we should really relish in our weaknesses. Don't run from failure. Don't hide from it. Don't run from mistakes. Don't run from difficulty and frustration even. Embrace it knowing that God's grace is sufficient. God's grace, not our own strength, not our own ideas, not our own plans. God's grace is sufficient to get us through it. So I want to encourage you with that. God's grace is real. And my prayer for you is that it will be made known and made real to you this week, this day. And if you're going through a great time, praise God. His grace is still sufficient to get you even through this good time, because it's not you, it's Him who carries you through all that and gives you the blessing. So thanks for joining, and I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. And even if you don't, remember, God's grace is sufficient.